Phil, do you want to read out these conclusions and take it home? Or do you want me to read the conclusions and you begin it, so what?
No, absolutely. I'll pick up right on the next slide on conclusion. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, it's showing.
Excellent, excellent. So just some general statements, and Brian's been kind of hitting these as he's gone anyway. But we really believe that we can learn a lot from looking at these workplace discrimination profiles of these two groups of people with sensory impairment. Looking at those groups in absolute terms, individually, if you will, compared to one another, and then compared to the broader disability population. And so just some of the kind of highlights here as we move out of this part and then get to some more questions and discussion. The first one on this slide is, I think, the most compelling thing is that the allegations had some striking similarities between the two groups in terms of several things. The demographic characteristics like age at the time the person made the allegation. A couple of issues in particular, such as terms and conditions of employment and hiring. Very, very similar between the two groups, as we had mentioned. The rate of merit and obversely non-merit case resolutions, really, really similar for each group. And Brian, I guess just here I wanted to just say that this was a little bit counterintuitive, and I don't know that we would have expected quite so many of these similarities as we were talking about this Helen Keller question and then getting into the specific research operations of this study. We were sort of thinking that wouldn't it be more likely, without knowing all this, that these experiences might be quite opposite, because the way that people with hearing loss accommodate their sensory impairment is often through visual cues and stimuli, and vice versa. People with visual impairments often accommodate those by relying on auditory input. And so the way we would go about accommodations would seem to be somewhat opposite. And that's not really what we found here. And so we're wondering if there may be something unitary about sensory impairment in the way that employers respond in the workplace, based on these similarities. We don't know the full answer to that, but it's an interest. I think there's more to look into here as we look at attitudes toward people with disabilities, usually differentiated at the impairment level, and some similarities here that I think we probably weren't fully expecting. And we do see some moderate differences between the two groups, as we mentioned, around ethnicity and gender. Not really significant difference, not really striking, but some moderate, and they are significant given the sheer numbers of people in the analyses. Comparing people with hearing loss to vision loss, we do see some of those moderate differences related to discharge and firing between the two groups, reasonable accommodation, harassment and intimidation, but in many ways nothing to really write home about. The other part of this, though, going down to the next bullet, is that both sensory impairment groups were more similar to one another than they were to the general disability comparison sample. I don't think there's any doubt about that. In terms of hiring and promotion related issues, much higher for the vision loss and hearing loss groups than when you combine them. Much higher merit rates for sure, lower non-merit rates in terms of the outcome. So there's some more study that needs to be done, maybe through this database and maybe through some other means where we can really pull apart some of these differences. But the upshot really is more similar than not. And Brian, I really did find that really interesting part of this. And it's always interesting when you find things that when you're not quite sure what you're expected, we did this really as an exploratory study, but I don't think we would have predicted it quite in this way, Brian. And go ahead.
I think you're right, Phil. I think that a reasonable accommodation, for example, there's been such improvement since 1990 in the amount of assistive technology available, both on the hearing side and on the vision side. So although the tools are entirely different, they both involve, more accessibility to obviously the internet, to distance learning, but all kinds of little things that are hearing and vision specific. I mean, literally hundreds of apps and of adaptive resources to empower people. That seems to have brought the two groups to a comparable level of accommodation and they're certainly getting plenty, there's certainly plenty of attention to that. So I think that
No doubt.
we have not discussed this, but your interpretation of this is identical to mine. You want to go to the so what?
Yes, great minds think alike, right? So what? Yes, Brian, every conversation we have has a few of these in there from both of us. So what? What's the point? And several points here. I think one of the things that may inform some of these findings have to do, and Brian alluded to this, with the organized advocacy communities that exist among people with hearing loss and vision loss, and including putting the two together, folks who are deaf-blind. And so we really believe that people with vision loss and hearing loss and employers, rehabilitation professionals, state vocational rehabilitation programs, advocacy organizations need to understand how workplace discrimination manifests itself among members of these two groups, how they differ and how they compare to the overall scourge of workplace discrimination, which we're still working to first reduce and then eventually eliminate. We're not sure what the implications are for VR state agencies that have separate programs. About half of them do and half of them don't, but many of the states that have general agencies still have counselor-specific caseloads, et cetera. But we really think VR counselors have a very important role to play, regardless of their state, in helping clients and consumers to understand the potential pitfalls in accessing employment. We think that hiring is a red flag here, and we've got to do more in the pre-employment preparation. And can we help to head off some of the issues that then become discriminatory, that result in discriminatory reactions from employers before they become problematic? What are the employer issues that are leading to these hiring discrimination allegations? And what can we do about that as we work on both the supply and demand side of job development and placement? So what can we do in the way of employment preparation, job seeking? Brian mentioned those services, self-advocacy training, information about the accommodations that one might need, et cetera. And on the other side, on the job retention side, the lower rate of discharge-related allegations would suggest that we've got a lot that can be learned about how people with sensory impairments retain employment once they're in the door. And so what are some of those facilitative factors on the job that help people to continue in employment once they're in, and thereby prevent the incidence of discharge-related and firing allegations? Shifting gears a little bit, we're also publishing a series of studies of regional profiles of the workplace discrimination experiences of people with disabilities across the entire data set. But we're looking at the 10 Department of Education Rehabilitation Services Administration regions, collapsing each region into collapsing 2 regions at a time into 5 consolidated regions. And we're going to present profiles of what's going on in your own state and where your state stacks up with other states in the regions and where your state stacks up nationally in terms of the type of discrimination, the incidents, the outcomes, et cetera. We'll have access to the whole descriptive data set and run those profiles. And those will be published in a series commissioned by Rehabilitation Research, Policy, and Education, which is the official journal of the National Council on Rehabilitation Education. Slides we'll be happy to make available upon request. We'll get to our email addresses here in just a moment. And most of the material from this presentation is going to be published in an article also in Rehabilitation Research, Policy, and Education, which should literally be coming out any day now in that journal. We can send PDFs to you of the journal of the article when it comes out. And if you're subscribers to that journal, you may wish to be looking for that as well. Next slide, Brian. I'm just going to click off a few of these national and state level resources in the way of closing. We've got a category of national resources, organizations such as the National Association of the Deaf, the National Association of the Deaf Blind, the American Hearing Research Foundation, interesting group there, American Foundation for the Blind, the National Federation of the Blind, others as we go down through, the Helen Keller Center for deaf blind individuals. As we go through, American Deafness and Rehabilitation Association. I'm skipping a few, but we've just kind of hitting the highlights of organizations you may wish to contact at the state and local level. We think state chapters of these advocacy organizations are very, very important. State vocational rehabilitation agencies in your state to find out what's happening in the way of vocational services for people who are blind or deaf or both. Local deafness and blindness organizations, centers for independent living. We also, if you're working with folks who think they may be encountering workplace discrimination, we'd certainly recommend an inquiry to the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. That does it for that slide, Brian. And the next one is just our thanks to all of you for your patience and indulgence and your interest in this topic. You can tell we're very interested in it, and we've got ongoing studies related to other disability populations. If you'd like to hear more about them, we'd love to dialogue with you and bring you into our growing community of practice in ADA research. Emails for all of us are there. We're going to have time for a few questions. But Brian, as our special guest today, I want to thank you for sharing your time and expertise with us. It's always a pleasure. And I want to give you the last word on this program as we take it home. So it's all yours, sir.
Yeah, I would appreciate a minute just to say a couple of things. Again, this is one study of 95 studies we will have completed by June 30th. And there's so many. It's one story that we tell, and there are 94 other stories that you can access because we're happy to share any reprints, send you bibliographies of what we have, and so on. I know there's a question that came up. Somebody actually emailed me here. I took that kind of trouble, but where are the deaf-blind cases in the database? And to get those, and I really regret that we didn't get those, a terrible discourtesy to Helen Keller. A person would have to file a complaint. A person who's deafblind would have to file 2 complaints. There's no code for deafblindness, but they certainly have, and I have not extracted those. So I'm going to make it a point to find the same individual with the same charging party number who filed a deafness and a blindness complaint. Well, that's a deaf-blind, individual. I regret that that's another thing we left out for you. I do want to tell you that I had a really interesting experience where, I have about 3 months left of employment at VCU, and a number of the students haven't seen us in so long or have never seen us because everything we've done is digital. And they asked to have Zoom meetings with professors. And they asked me what was, the single activity in my, believe it or not, 49-year career that I was most proud of. And what drew me to these kinds of subjects. And it was working, on this book called Enabling Lives. I don't even know if it's in print, so I'm not trying to sell it to you. I don't get any royalties on it. But this is a biography of people who were, that Linda Shaw and I put together, people like Frank Bowe, people like Judy Heumann and Justin Dart. To get to meet these people, they were advocates extraordinaire. Harold Russell, a veteran and Oscar winner, Tony Coelho, House of Representatives and Presidential Chief of Staff, Evan Kemp, EEOC Chair. These are the people who moved around and that we worked with in the late 80s and early 90s to get the law passed. That was a peak experience for me in terms of my buy-in and interest in bringing things, and we're not the only group. NEARP is not the only group, but in terms of bringing things that are scientific and answering questions to how the ADA is playing out. I want to end with a interpretation of the purposes and findings of the Act that's actually in the ADA. I think it's the most significant thing that happened in disability world in the history of the planet. It was the first civil rights law for people with disabilities by any country in the world. To have these ideals that treasure the contributions that individuals can make when free from arbitrary, unjust, or outmoded societal attitudes and practices that prevent the realization of their potential. ADA reflects a recognition that the surest path to America's continued vitality, strength, and vibrancy is through the full realization of the contribution of all of its citizens. And to conclude, before we go to discussion with President George Bush's 41st, George Bush 41's famous statement on July 26, 1990, when he signed the act, which he regards as his single most important legislative achievement of let the shameful walls of exclusion finally come tumbling down. And that's what we're a part of here, to try and move the needle on that just a little bit as interested parties and researchers, for all the motivations you have of working in and with, living with, caring for people with disabilities. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. And we welcome any questions or comments that you may have.
This first question is, doesn't it make sense that if the discrimination rate for hiring is higher for sensory disabilities than for other disabilities, that leaves a smaller group that is hired and can experience other kinds of discrimination on the job? To me, that could explain why the proportion of complaints about firing are lower for these groups than for the general set of people with other disabilities.
Is it possible? Yeah, that's possible. I mean,
yeah, our findings are actually, I think they're the opposite of this question. The rate of hiring discrimination is lower for people with hearing and vision loss, and it's higher for firing. So they have. I'm saying that wrong. No, Brian. I'm saying that the rate of hiring discrimination is. Brian, help me out here. I'm sorry. Now I lost what I was about to say.
The level of hiring discrimination based upon the proportion within your impairment group, the proportion of claims that you're filing for hiring is twice as high. Is twice as high as the general population of people without sensory disabilities.
Yes, and that would mean, I think, to the point, the question is right. That would mean that there's fewer people in the workforce
Correct.
who can encounter the firing discrimination. If they're not in the first place, then they can't be discriminated against later.
But that doesn't explain why, discharge would be lower. No, it's totally independent, because just talking about the proportion of people experiencing within your group, experiencing lower levels of getting fired, would not be because of what's going on in hiring.
Yes. Sorry, I got confused. That's a great question.
Thank you. This next question is, could you possibly go into a bit more of the differences between right to work and union security and how those differences affect individuals with disabilities?
Very simple. Right to work is the red state. Right? Any questions? Of all the states that lit up the election on whatever screen you were watching as red, are likely right to work states, and union security states are the blue states. Blue states, the difference in a right to work state and a union security state is simple. In a union security state, you must basically, join the union and pay dues to get your job. In a right to work state, no, you don't have to pay dues to no union. You can get your job and decide if you want to pay dues to a union. And of course, nobody wants to do that. Or there are no unions available at that place of employment, and they're strongly resisted. This draws, in the red states, this draws far more businesses to your state, right? Because businesses are pretty inherently anti-union. So that's the difference in cause. The point is, the unions in the union states, in the union security states, they're probably snuffing out complaints of discrimination before they get the EEOC. If you're in the union, you say, I got a real problem with my disability. I'm going to go to my union steward. You go to your union steward. He knows the supervisor. The three of you sit down and you work it out. Nothing is ever filed at the EEOC. So there are plenty of discrimination problems likely that are being resolved at the union level, and therefore they're never going to show up in our database. And that likely explains the difference between why we see more EEOC complaints, 60% more in the union security in the red states than we do in the union security states.
Brian, wouldn't a unionized workplace tend to have more rules and protections around, for workers in all kinds of regards, like safety and, just more protective policies? In addition to the procedures, there would be a formal, just in general?
Yeah, and today's unions get it, because they used to just stand for higher wages. Now they stand for higher wages. They're big on civil rights protections, whether it's race, gender, disability, anything else, and they're big on safety. So, but they're less than 11% of the workforce, which is a record low. So they simply don't have the political power. And a lot of that is due to a long history of corruption, fraud, and abuse by their leadership back in the, mobster days.
Great questions.
Yeah. This next question is, I am an independent contractor, not an employee, for a few state and federal organizations. I also have a moderate sensory neural hearing loss and early stage AMD, along with other serious conditions, period. How does the ADA and 504 laws impact someone like me who is essentially self-employed?
Are you a sole employee? Are you a sole operator, lone wolf? Do you have employees?
It appears not. The question was, I'm an independent contractor, not an employee.
Okay. No, I know that, but if you're an independent contractor and you're solo, well, I can't answer this because this is first and most foremost debate going on right now in the Department of Labor. As you see in Uber, as you see in all these independent contractor jobs, this is depends on your state law, but it's all under, it's chaotic. It's like saying, it's like fighting the pandemic. It's the number one debate in labor in America today, and it's not, it is not resolved to anybody's satisfaction. If
go ahead.
You are legally regarded as a contractor, you still would likely have protections because the federal law, the ADA, always preempts the state ADA laws. You can't make a state law that's less restrictive than the ADA. It has to be more restrictive, and that means benefits the worker more. So as the worker, I would say in most cases, you should get the protections of the Act. But I can't tell you definitively because it's just a hot mess right now, that issue. It's a wonderful question. I wish I could answer it.
This next question is not directly related to your topic, but do you wish to speak to Title III and the Online Accessibility Act that was not passed in the last Congress?
No. Okay. I'll tell you why. Phil knows when ADA came out, we were working together in Milwaukee. For about 6 years, I was an ADA Title IV guy and an ADA Title I person. Because I had a deafness background, I was pretty more than adequate in sign language, and I helped a lot put in tele-relay systems in Illinois Bell, Kansas Bell, and Wisconsin Bell. And but it just simply got to be so big. I limited myself to Title I only, and I have no more than a cursory knowledge of what's going on in the public access provisions. I'm sorry. But an answer on my part would be a fabrication and probably wrong.
I think I would only say that I'm not an expert there either, but I think that part of the rationale for voting against that pending bill was that the accessibility was already quite good under Titles 2 and 3 of the ADA web accessibility wise. I personally, I think that's a bit of a cop-out. I think that we've got a ways to go in making sure that web accessibility is really inclusive and universally designed in the way that it should be. And disability access around technology always has to follow new developments in whatever is happening in information and communication technology. And I wish we'd get to a point where it didn't have to follow it. It could happen sort of in concert. But every time there's a new development in technology, we have to figure out how to retrofit that in an accessibility context. And our colleague and my boss, Dr. Kathy Shepard-Jones, her work in universal design would suggest that why don't we build these systems as accessible to as many users as possible up front, and then we don't have to worry about whether providers of public accommodations are violating the law or not, because everyone would have access to begin with. So I think that's the next iteration, and didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but that's a great question too.
This last question is a quick question about data, and I hope it's not too off topic. I wonder whether those who filed discrimination are all U.S. citizens. I am guessing EEOC may not ask the citizenship question, but I wonder whether discrimination levels may be different between visa holders with disabilities versus United States citizens with disabilities.
Yes, we don't capture that data. Basically, the law protects an employee, period. So yes, there are many immigrants, many people with green cards, many people with legitimate visas. Their rights are fully protected under the law. under the federal act. And remember, no state can preempt the federal act. They must make it. They can only have a law that's different from the ADA if it's more favorable to the worker. But yes, there's plenty of immigrants. And I don't, but the EEOC does not collect citizenship data, but the person is protected. Even if the person was working illegally.
That's right, Brian. Undocumented workers are covered too, yes?
Yes, we also have
Yes.
American plants all over the world, and they are expected to comport with ADA as well.
That's a great question.
That's an outstanding question. I've never been asked that. Very intelligent, not off topic at all. Thank you, Walt.
Brian, thank you again. This is great, as always.
Yeah, as advertised, this has been phenomenal. It's been an honor and a privilege for you all to join us today. And thank you for your time to share your experiences and expertise with us. Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe.